everybody. My name is Kevin Wilson, and this is The Beacon. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate you being here. This is Dominion Payroll's ongoing webinar series where we bring you insights and perspectives from around the business community to help you navigate today's challenges and rise to meet the opportunities ahead. From legislative updates, analysis, to industry spotlights, and really sharing the stories of folks' entrepreneurial journeys you may not hear otherwise. The Beacon is here for you every Wednesday at 11 a.m. So we definitely appreciate you tuning in. As Director of Community Engagement for Dominion Payroll, I'm really excited to have this conversation today. Before I introduce our panelists, however, I do need to cover a couple housekeeping measures. If you do have any questions for our guests today, please drop those in the Q&A rather than the chat. We record these so that folks can see all the questions and have this conversation for reference later. The Q&A plays nicely with that while the chat disappears into the ether at the end of the show. If you'd like to register for any upcoming webinars, I do encourage you to go to dominionpayroll.com and hit that COVID-19 resource button at the top of the homepage. There you can see our whole host of resources, previously recorded webinars, all the sorts of forms and necessary bits of information to help you navigate the CARES Act and FFCRA and EFMLA and the alphabet soup that we've all grown to know and love. And should any questions come to you when we are not live and on the air with you, you can always send an email to questions@dominionpayroll.com and we will take care of you. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, we're going to go on to today's topic. We're taking a look at charity, community, and corporate social responsibility. As we wind down this unprecedented year of pandemic and economic hardship, growing calls for social justice in our communities, we have the opportunity to really reflect on the type of community we aspire to have and create. It's common this time of year to get into that giving spirit, think perhaps of those who are less fortunate. I think our panelists would agree that while this is a great time of year to have those thoughts, and perhaps as we get into the sort of the quietness of winter, reflecting on that is important, but I think that we'd also all be better served by a community that's compassionate year-round and invest in sound public policy no matter what the season. Today, we're going to take stock of how our nonprofit community is faring 9 months into this pandemic and how the giving community, private individuals, businesses, foundations, how they're rising to meet the terrific needs of the day. We'll touch on effective ways that businesses can develop their own corporate social responsibility programming and give you a little insight on how you and your team may be able to give back, not just today, but into the future. So without further ado, I am really excited to welcome this fantastic panel. Joining me today, I have Christina Mastroianni, who I've said your name at least 17 times into the mirror today to make sure I got it right. I hope I did.
Yes.
Christina is the Director of Civic Engagement at the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond. She's got a background in strategic communication, intergovernmental relations, and public policy. She joins the Community Foundation after a 3 or 4 year stint with the City of Richmond's Office of Community Wealth Building. Christina and I have had the pleasure of working together on RVA Engage, the Civic Impact Summit that we brought to Richmond last year. It's a real pleasure to have you on, Christina. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning.
My pleasure.
Next up, we have Jeff Wilklow, who is the Chief Development Officer at Feedmore, joining Feedmore just 6 months ago, but following a 24 months ago.
Yeah,
who's counting at this point, right?
I mean, I got it all figured out.
You're a veteran. You're a veteran.
There you go. No more new guy chits. Yeah.
That's right. Well, I think if if you're born through a trial by fire, this was the season to join and get your chops.
Right.
But I know that 20 plus years, your background in nonprofit consulting certainly, leaves you well prepared to rise to the challenges of leading Feedmore's effort to have the resources it needs to serve the Central Virginia community. Jeff, I'm really excited to get to know you and have you join this conversation this morning.
Thanks for the invitation, Kevin. Happy to be here.
Absolutely.
And you also did a good job with my last name. I'm sure you had to practice that as well.
The Jeff Tweedy, Wilklow. These are the
Wilklow fan. Very good. We can talk about that later.
All right. Well, folks, I always try to do my best to give a little bio summary here, but I think it's always best coming direct from the source. Christina, I'd love it if you tell us a little bit more about the Community Foundation, the work that you do there, and sort of the constituents that you all serve.
Definitely. So best put, the Community Foundation creates ways for people to learn, to engage, and to give back in ways that are meaningful to them. This ranges from everything from a volunteer hub, which many people may be familiar with, Hands On Greater Richmond, which connects volunteers to nonprofits in need, and to individuals and families who might want to start a donor advised fund. So we've got, on one hand, sort of the grassroots volunteering with nonprofits, and then on the other hand, individuals and families who have the means to start funds that allow them to donate money to a cause every year. Community foundations are located throughout the United States and the world, and their primary purpose is to guide philanthropy and improve the quality of life in a very specific geographic region.
Awesome. Well, I know that the impact that you all have had, and I know there's a tremendous amount of press in the early days of the pandemic about sort of very quickly spinning up sort of a COVID reaction fund.
Yep.
And the last, it was a multi-million-dollar fund. Am I right on that?
Yeah, so we've over $6 million has been raised. It was activated by the Community Foundation and the Emergency Management Alliance of Central Virginia. That's a mouthful. But yeah, the aim was to provide rapid support to community organizations and public agencies that are meeting the needs of individuals and families that were affected by the coronavirus. What's interesting is that the fund initially addressed emergency response strategies like health services, shelter for the homeless, food access, and procurement of food and safety supplies. Now we're shifting more to, as businesses were reopening for business, the fund is expanding its scope to long-term recovery. And so it's going to be interesting to see sort of as things flip back maybe to more emergent needs. So
absolutely. Well, I think that also gives us a good jumping off point to turn to Jeff. And I'd love to, in the 4 months that you've been with Feed More, I'm sure that you're well versed in the long history there. But if you could tell us a little bit about the key constituents that you serve, and really, I personally have found myself fascinated by the geographic scope that Feed More hits. It's not just a few neighborhoods in Richmond, but if you could tell us a little bit about that, and I think our audience would love to learn a little bit just about your background that led you to Feed More.
Sure, thanks. So we are part of the Feeding America network, and Feeding America has basically, you talk about the geographic scope, they've cut up the United States into essentially franchises. We have the Central Virginia franchise from Feeding America. So there are we have seven, including ourselves, we have 6 counterparts in Virginia that cover the entire geographic scale of Virginia. So wherever you end up in Virginia, there is a Feeding America partner who serves that area. So our area goes from the Northern Neck down to North Carolina border through Central Virginia. Obviously a lot of that is around the Richmond area, but we do go all the way down to South Hill and all the way up to the Potomac River.
Wow.
So it's a pretty big scope.
Wow.
We have 270 agencies who we work with. So you may hear about other food banks within that area. For example, the Chesterfield Food Bank in Chesterfield County is a very large food bank. They are one of our 270 agencies who we serve. So we have tractor trailers pulling in and out of here every day with loads of food that are then going out across this region to service all those. So we've got partners as large as regional distribution centers like Chesterfield Food Bank or Healthy Harvest up in Northern Neck, who then also serve dozens of food pantries and community kitchens in their area. So it's a pretty comprehensive and complex business. And that's one of the things that attracted me to Feed More was having worked in 16 years in consulting. I was very impressed with how well run it is. It's really run like a business. They've got a very good handle on their food insecurity need in Central Virginia. We get a lot of statistics from Feeding America that we can then see how much of that need are we filling, where are we missing, what else should we be doing, and we do that all through this partnership, both with Feeding America and the partner with our network of agencies who distribute food throughout. So the network's very important to us, and that's a lot of what we do is support them so that they can do a better job of getting to the clients. What got me here, I was in consulting. Feedmore was one of my clients. I was helping Feedmore with their capital campaign. So I've really, I've 4 months, but also 4 years before that I was working as a consultant. So I had some idea what was going on here. But of course, it's always different once you get inside, and just see how complex it is. But so I did 16 years of that. So I got to see a lot of different organizations around the country who were doing fundraising on various levels and serving the community on various levels. And Feedmore really is among my favorite clients of that 16 years. So that's why I'm here. Like everybody else, I fell in love with it, and it couldn't resist the call to come see if I could help make a difference here. Prior to the consulting, I was the Chief Development Officer at the Points of Light Foundation, now the Points of Light Institute. Relevant to this conversation because we had a lot of, and you mentioned Hands-on Greater Richmond, part of that network. And so we were very involved in volunteering to help solve serious social problems, just as Hands-on Greater Richmond is. And we also were very involved in employee volunteer programs and helping people set up their CSR programs. So I do know a little bit about that space. So I'm very, very interested in this particular conversation and what we can do to help people get more engaged in their community. And I am a big fan of the Community Foundation. My first home is in Fairfax, Virginia. My second home is here in Manchester. We have an apartment in Manchester, so I commute back and forth across the state down here for a week, and then I go home. But so we have, my wife and I have a donor advised fund with the Northern Virginia Community Foundation, and I highly recommend that to anybody. Just it's a great way to be more plugged into your community, be more strategic about your own personal giving. The Community Foundation is a great partner for that, and we have at Feedmore have a great partnership.
Yes.
With Christina. So glad to be here today with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm honestly, I'm absolutely thrilled to just pick both of your brains in the time that we have together this morning. One thing that as I've gotten to know Feedmore a little bit through some of our engagement opportunities, and you hit the nail on the head. The fact that it is run as a logistical business is such. It's a 90-degree turn from the way that so many folks and myself included really considered, dispersing resources to those in need. And rather than it being a handout, it was more of all right, here's a complex geometry problem to solve. And it's just an interesting perspective to make it so efficient and so good at serving those in need in a way that reduces waste, optimizes the outcome. I just was really impressed by that and wanted to make sure that I said that.
That's great. Let me give you 2 quick factoids on that, just to underscore your point, Kevin. Last year we moved 34 million pounds of food, and nearly 40% of that was produce. And when you think about that, because we're very focused on healthy eating, and I told a friend of mine, I've got a high school buddy who was chief operating officer at a food bank on the West Coast. And I was talking to him before I took this job. And I said, I used to think food banks were SpaghettiOs on shelves. And Ralph laughed at that. I said, it's just amazing to me how complex it is, because when you talk about moving produce, you've got to move it fast, right? You can't have it sitting around in the storeroom for weeks. It's like it's in, it's out, and you go to the agencies and you make them, and they get it out. So just the complexity of that, you can just imagine.
That's amazing. 34 million. That's
a lot of food.
Yeah. Christina, I'd like to turn to you, and I know that in so many of these conversations that I've had over the previous few months, when I talk to small business owners, the word pivot comes up constantly, to the point that I'm tired of saying it, but I've yet to come up with an introduction from the thesaurus. So I think it is fascinating when you sort of consider how the community foundation was operating 12, 16 months ago, I'm curious, what have those changes looked like in your organization? Has it, I mean, is it navigating the demands of being, fully remote? Are the types of constituencies that you're serving, has that changed dramatically? Or have you been surprised by some things that have perhaps been consistent, through this time? I'm just really curious in broad brushstrokes, what have the last 9 months really looked like in terms of change for you all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think it's something that a lot of us are sort of grappling with right now and sort of thinking, what are we going to keep from these past 9 months and carry over into the future? But one thing I will say is just personally, I have learned more about the ingredients that make up hand sanitizer and the distribution and bottling of hand sanitizer and the best material to use to make masks than I have ever wanted to know. The foundation took on the task to distribute masks and hand sanitizer to the 13 counties that make up the Virginia Department of Emergency Management Region 1. And Feedmore was a phenomenal partner because they were the recipient of all these masks. And then we pulled them from the warehouse and did a number of large scale distribution projects, but we distributed over 600,000 masks and close to 58,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. And we're not done yet. And so one of the things that I was really impressed with the foundation is, and pivot is the best word, like we did things a certain way and we realized very quickly, this is not going to work. We have to just turn on a dime. And so we immediately, all of our corporate partners stopped their large scale projects, volunteer projects. And so we immediately utilized that expertise that we had in-house to start deploying masks and sanitizer into communities, predominantly really trying to focus on communities where there was dense housing situations, low income, persons of color, because all the data was showing that that's where the need was the greatest. And so we were able to do that, and just the depth and the breadth of our partnerships with nonprofits really helped to just get those materials out. And then also just the response fund, just how quickly that COVID response fund was started up, and just the amazing gift of funding that corporations and individuals, how they have stepped forward. And then I think the other thing is just, we have learned as an organization that we can work remotely, but we also realize that it's very isolating. And part of the magic of our work is the communication and the intersection and the bouncing of ideas. And I think that that's something that we've also heard from a lot of our partners. The last thing I'll mention is that we had been talking about launching virtual volunteering, remote volunteering, and skills-based volunteering. And when the pandemic hit, we realized this was the time that we needed to just press the go button.
Yeah.
And so we have been working really closely with a lot of our nonprofit partners to shift their work to remote or virtual. It has been, it's been phenomenal. I mean, this is a big shift for nonprofits. And they have, if you go to the hands-on page, there's a whole page section dedicated to virtual volunteering. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll just make a plug for that skills-based volunteering. If you are an individual and you have a specific skill to give, nonprofits are in desperate need of those resources. And I'll send links and stuff to you, Kevin, so you can send them out to folks.
Yeah, we'll absolutely get those out in a post-show communication. Jeff, I want to turn to you. As I sort of think about the experience of Feed More, the last 9 months have been this story of extremes. In March, the unemployment rate just, I mean, there's nothing other than cataclysmic. I mean, it just unprecedented in our history, really. But then, the rapid deployment of sort of CARES Act funds and things like that, maybe not, it's certainly not 100% effective, but certainly came in and helped people that were in need. But there are already, 1 in 5 children in the U.S. that are food insecure. Endemic poverty. I mean, all of these issues were not new. They weren't created by the pandemic. They were certainly exacerbated. And I'm curious, what has the experience been in servicing, communities of need over the last 9 months? Has it been a roller coaster? Has it been, I mean, did it crater and then you're just there like, oh no?
Yeah.
I don't mean to make light of it, but
Sure.
Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, actually, it's an excellent question, Kevin, because yes, we've had to pivot like everybody else. We've had to scale up. We adapt and respond is another. You can add to your thesaurus on
like
these.
that.
Respond and adapt and evolve is what we're doing. And I mean the challenge in the food bank world is that this does happen. We do get these spikes. We get a hurricane that comes through and have a bunch of people who are suddenly out of their homes or out of their jobs or whatever it is. There are other things that have affected this in the past. And so we do have to have scalability built into our business. And in fact, that was a big part of the capital campaign that I was working on with Feed More. So the good news is we were getting near the end of completing this capital campaign and raised a significant amount of money to be able to do things like build a new distribution center down in South Hill so that we could better service the, south side and Southern Virginia, South Central Virginia, and had done some things to help our agencies, especially our regional distribution centers like the Healthy Harvest one, build a new distribution center there. So when this happened, we had the capacity to bring in more food and store more food. We had the capacity to split our kitchen in 2 so that if we had an outbreak in one of the kitchens, we would still have a kitchen that could keep running because we do Meals on Wheels. And so we had to freeze, instead of doing 1 meal delivery a day for 5 days a week, we're doing 1 a week because we had, as Christina mentioned, we had a big drop off in volunteers, both individual volunteers who were older, who didn't want to be exposed, and the corporate volunteer program just went away in the spring, or they just, shut it down. We didn't shut it down. Companies just said, we can't be doing that for now. So we had to retool our way of distributing, both to provide safety for our volunteers and for our clients, and also to respond to the fact that we had a limited volunteer pool to work with. So we had to do a lot of things to make sure we could serve more food to more people with fewer volunteers. The good news is we didn't have a lack of food. We had plenty of food coming in, partly from the USDA, partly because we did get a lot of community support. We were able to buy a lot of food, although anyway, that there were shortages in that supply line as well. So all of that spiked March and April, big spike, and we had to respond. It started to tail off through August and September, and then it's starting to go back up again as people, their unemployment runs out, as the government programs run out, as businesses continue to close, and we're really concerned about what's going to happen in January. So sure. It's all about adapting and responding and being able to scale up when these things happen, and about predicting where it's going to go, not just in January, but we're also worried about things like artificial intelligence, 5 or 10 years down the line, what's happening when those jobs disappear? And we got to be ready for that. Are we going to be able to be responsive? So there's a lot of predicting, and we have to pay a lot of attention to the tea leaves and what's going on in the economy, and jobs matter, and even in terms of what we do to help find people jobs. We want to get people out of the food line. We don't want to, we're trying to put ourselves out of business. It's apparently never going to happen, but at least, what we can do to get people out of the food line, help them get jobs, help them get housing, help get them education. So working with partners in the community, such as community colleges who work on certification programs and providing food scholarships to students while they're getting their certification so that they get jobs, things like that we're always looking at. So lots of adaptation. I'm not sure I answered your original question on
No,
that.
that was great. And honestly, that's the first time that I have necessarily heard someone in the nonprofit space talking about sort of the disruptive impact of technology and preparing for that. I mean, so often it is a retraining or a re-education in the private sector, and it's sort of like, well, how can we rise to take advantage of these things? These are market opportunities, but the displacement that comes along with it, these technologies could potentially be quite devastating. And frankly, it probably makes me sleep a little bit better at night knowing that you and others like you are thinking about it.
I credit our CEO. I credit our CEO Doug Pick with that. He loves futurists, and he's always talking 10 years out. And I'm like, yeah, let us just get through the next quarter, Doug. Okay?
I've got romaine that's going to go bad next week.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to turn to the sort of a perennial issue around nonprofits. It's funding, dollars on the balance sheet. Christina, your organization directs the movement of a lot of money. Jeff, your primary role is to bring in money to support the work that Feedmore is doing. What's the landscape like out there right now? Are people giving? I've heard stats where America's savings rate, just despite widespread unemployment, people that were fortunate enough to keep their jobs, have been putting money into savings accounts at a greater rate than they have in the last 10 years. Is that showing up in individual donations? People perhaps are maybe underemployed right now, or are we seeing that in volunteer hours? Or is the uncertainty such that everybody's just keeping their powder dry and just sort of saying, you know what, I don't know what next week looks like, and I've felt that way since March. I'd love to give, but I frankly, I'm too nervous. Or is it a mixed bag? And I sort of want to toss that to both of you, but maybe Christina, you could start us off.
Yeah, we actually have just finished our data. So the timing of this was great because we were just putting together some end of year data, and we saw a 12.5% increase from last year in the total number of volunteers mobilized. So what's interesting, and I'll talk specifically about Richmond Public Schools because that was a place where people came out in droves, and we're talking about people who were on buses distributing food, who were at schools distributing food. Over 5,000 volunteers between March and September helped prepare and distribute to Richmond Public School families. Like 1.5 million meals, 1 million diapers, 20,000 PPE kits. So when people were not working or working remotely, they came out and they showed up. It also showed in the COVID fund and in the city that there was a additional funds that were created. So people were really coming forward, stepping forward, and using, their time, their money, and their voice to make as much change as they could. So it definitely showed up in the numbers for us. One of the interesting, you had mentioned, Jeff, that the corporate partners, they all pulled back and stopped their corporate volunteering programs. But what was interesting is that in our conversations with them, they were encouraging their employees to go volunteer on their own. Like, if you want to continue volunteering, continue doing that, but we can't, ethically say we're going to continue our corporate volunteering program. So the numbers really, really showed a commitment in the community to making a difference.
That totally reflects the reality from where I sit at Dominion Payroll, where we're like, we really can't sanction sending 10, 20 people to go do an activity that does come with some inherent risk, but we can certainly share the information. We can say, hey, if on your own volition you want to go out and do this, by all means, please do, which, is threading the needle in a certain way. I know that it sort of hurt our heart a little bit to see some of those formal programs have to pull back from them. Jeff, I'd like to turn to you. You know, are folks picking up the phone? How is, yeah.
No, one of the other reasons that I was so interested in taking this job at Feedmore is because I love the Richmond community, and I mentioned we live in Fairfax. My wife and I lived here 30 years ago when I was working with Special Olympics back in the day, we just have loved coming back to a community that takes care of their neighbors. We've been getting, tremendous support from people. It's I call it, the there but for the grace of God money. We've got a number of people who have, a lot of us have kept their jobs and are able to feed our families. And a lot of people are seeing, as you said, the news about folks who are not and wanting to help. And so we have been, we've been blessed with some very generous support within this last 9 months that has enabled us to go out and, do the things that we've had to do to be able to feed more people. But one of the concerns we have is that, the giving goes in cycles. Donors are fickle. And, we were concerned that the presidential election may impact our giving because in 2016 it did. The noise around the presidential election and then the surprise outcome of the presidential election last time pivoted a lot of donors to causes that they thought were going to be under stress, environmental causes, progressive causes, things that they thought were in danger, and they forgot about, food banks. And a lot of our donations dried up. And it was like, well, we still have hungry people over here. So we were afraid that might happen again this time. It didn't. We were concerned about the stock market because that impacts people's giving, how generous they feel. It depends on what they see on their balance sheet. Whether or not they still have money isn't really as much the issue as what we call psychic poverty. You may have millions of dollars in your bank account or in your investment portfolio, but if it goes down 20 or 30%, you're not feeling quite so generous about it. That hasn't happened. As you know, the stock market's held up. So we're seeing gifts of appreciated stock. It's another thing that I recommend to people about a community foundation is you don't have to figure out right now what you want to do with your resources. You could just look at your end of year statement and go, you know what, we did really well. And in fact, we should do some hedging here for tax purposes. So let's give some of this away so we have a deduction and we can figure out later what we're going to do with it, but just move appreciated stock into a donor advised fund at the community foundation, which is what we did. And then you can figure it out as you go. So we're seeing that. We're seeing more people end of year recognizing that they're in very good shape financially and they want to be a little bit more generous because of that. But we're concerned about the long term, while we have people's attention, we want them to know that these are some systemic problems that we're trying to deal with, and we're trying to create systemic change over time. And so don't forget about the fact that your neighbor, there are still going to be neighbors hungry, even if the economy comes roaring back and COVID goes away and the vaccine comes out. Don't forget about the fact there are still going to be people who are going to be in need for all kinds of reasons, not their fault. So that's the thing I'm concerned about is how do we get sustained support? And when we think about, just pivot to the conversation about things like CSR programs, what we've seen is I've been doing this for over 30 years and the corporate community has moved away from writing checks for tables for galas, writing checks for golf tournaments, writing checks to organizations the CEO is on the board of. They still do those kind of things, but much more focused on strategic business interests, much more focused on, where are we really trying to go, and focused on things like long-term partnerships with community partners who they feel make a difference and who mirror their mission and their message and their audience and so forth. So we're seeing more of that in the corporate community, and that's really been helpful. Is to not rely on just event fundraising and so forth, but have real community partners in our corporate partners who are asking real serious questions about how can we be more supportive, and our recognition that it's not just about writing checks. The volunteer programs are very important to us. We could not do what we do without our hundreds of volunteers who come through here every week doing the kitchen and doing the Meals on Wheels and answering the phone on the hunger hotline and all the things that they do. Skills-based volunteers, as Christina said, we're really focusing on more of that. You don't have to put yourself at risk. We have more people asking, how can we volunteer from home? How can we send our corporate team to help you without actually them being on site. And there's a lot of opportunities that we have to help engage people that way. So all of which helps us fulfill our mission in a more meaningful way. And, marketing support, helping us get the message out to people, through corporations, marketing tools and vehicles and communication, advocacy on, at the state and local and federal government level, like, help us take care of these people. We can't do it all based on donated food. These are, again, systemic problems. Let's solve them together. So having corporate partners who are helping in all those different spaces is really important to us.
Well, Jeff, you're doing some of the heavy lifting on my role of trying to come up with segues here, and I appreciate that. But I do want to talk a little bit about sort of corporate social responsibility programs. And, I think that, a lot of our clients, small and mid-sized businesses, they're like, you know what, I really do want to give back to the community. I want to leverage some of the resources that I have for good. But, I don't feel like a Fortune 100 company. So, maybe I give a gift card when the athletic boosters come by, or, things like that, but it's not a cohesive program. And I know that as you get into, mid-sized and larger businesses, increasingly you are seeing some formal programming that occurs around this. I'm wondering if, and Christina, I'd like to start with you. Any business that maybe is saying, hey, we're creating this from scratch. We want to give back. We know that, there are benefits to staff engagement, recruiting and retention. There are academic reasons to do this, but really we want to lead with our heart, and it's great that our brain can follow. What kind of advice would you give to a business that's saying, we want to do something with our dollars and our hours, and do it in a sustainable fashion?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. One of the things that we always talk about is just the foundation of the conversation. So if a business is looking to develop, more of a rigorous CSR program, and to your point, like, let's say it's from scratch, the first thing that we always say is just have a series of thoughtful discussions. And here's the important point, with a multi-departmental team. So you've got to have the senior leadership on board at the table, along with frontline staff and management. It has to be a conversation that is embedded within the entire organization. And then also just making sure that you have champions at all levels. We all know it's really hard to implement something when it's just coming from the top, or it's just sitting at management level. So really, part of it is just starting to have that conversation. But then the other piece of it is figuring out, what are the business goals? What's your organization's business goals? And then also, looking at the community around you. And we have this, and this is one of the things that I'm going to send you when we do our CSR workshops. We have these sort of 4 areas that we encourage folks to look at. One, how are you showing up in your community? How are you as individuals showing up in your community? And how are you as a corporation, an organization, showing up in your community? And then, in your workplace, what sometimes people don't realize that corporate social responsibility can also be diversity and equity, training and development that takes place, your occupational health and well-being, thinking about work-life balance. Those are all elements of corporate social responsibility. And then also the environment. Are you engaged in activities or practices that will help the environment? That is also an element of corporate social responsibility. So, I could go on and on and on, but it's just interesting how when I first started working on this, there were elements of corporate social responsibility that I didn't realize were corporate social responsibility. And so it's good to just explore all of that before you say, this is what we're gonna, this is our program, this is our platform, have those conversations. So I'll send you that document.
Yeah, I'm excited to share that with our audience. I will give just a little plug to one little effort that I'm super proud of at Dominion Payroll. So one thing, and in my early days with the company, it didn't really occur to me sort of that environmental impact of printing checks, the ink and the paper and the miles driven and W-2s that go out every year. And so every year around January 1, we really ramp up. And it used to be that we would crank out 150,000 pieces of paper and mail them out to the world. And we have implemented an electronic delivery, a secure way that folks can get it. And we've cut that number by almost 3/4. And it was a little change, and it was using technology, but it was just like, hey, that's ink, miles driven, and pieces of paper that aren't getting pulled out of the environment. It was a little change, and something that I'm frankly just pretty proud of.
Kevin, one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, and I know we don't have a lot of time yet, but we are partnering with the Chamber on a series of conversations around CSR programs in 2021. And they're going to be like open house morning sessions. So once those are nailed down, I will definitely send you the information, but I encourage folks to check out our website as well for that. And then the last thing is that we have these Civic Life Today workshops that we do. We're doing one for CarMax right now. I believe we may be doing one with another corporate partner, but we're happy to come in and do these workshops, and it helps to just kind of prime the pump.
I love that. As someone who's worked fairly closely with Community Foundation, I can testify that the programming that they do put together is top notch. It really is. So you all deserve to be applauded for that. Jeff, drawn on your years in nonprofit consulting, and as you interface with corporations and businesses out there, I'm sure you've had the opportunity to sort of say, hey, let's examine your values. Let's figure out where to give back. And there's not a one size fits all or something that comes out of a box and you say, congratulations, Acme Corp, you've got a CSR program. I'm curious, same question that I posed to Christina, but any sort of tips, tricks, or insights as you think about companies sort of trying to navigate, being a little bit more of a philanthropic or responsible corporate citizen?
Yeah, excellent question. I feel like Christina did a really good job answering that in terms of, really thinking about where you are as a company, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and who's your audience, who's your message, what do you want to, who are good partners in this space. But also, as Christina mentioned, there are a lot of these issues, situations in our communities are more complex than we realize and have more arms and legs than we realize. I mean, I benefit from working for an organization. It's very simple to explain to people what we do. We feed hungry people, and people get that. It's like but it's a very complex issue. How do people end up in the food line in the first place, and what else do they need, and what are the other resources that are out there? So as you start to dive into that and drill into that, you can find an element of that you may be particularly well positioned in your business to be able to address that is underserved and underappreciated area where you can really exert your leverage and make an impact. So I'd say that would be probably the most important aspect of it, is where do you feel like you can have the most impact, and how do you have impact across the various areas that I mentioned before, beyond just, where we've got a limited amount of money that we have to give away. So that's one thing. But then we also have employee volunteer programs. We also have marketing. We have advocacy. We have leadership. There are other things that we can bring to bear on this subject. How do we have the most impact through that? And who do we partner with to help make all that happen? So I think being very strategic about that is very helpful. And then one thing that I think that the nonprofit sector benefits from in partnership with corporations is the ability to, the willingness to try things, the willingness to take some risks, to experiment, to fail. So we may or may not do that. We may or may not be successful with this. Let's try it. We think that we've got an idea here that we can work together on to make something happen, but let's be smart about it. Let's let's evaluate it, let's measure it, let's be honest about whether it worked or not, and figure out how do we make it better, or how or be willing to abandon that approach and try a new one. But stay with us as we work together to make these things happen, because these aren't problems we're going to fix in a fiscal year. So take a long-term approach, to your partnerships in the community to be really, really problem solvers about it, and not just look for a quick hit and a quick, grip and grin photo in the Richmond Times Dispatch. We achieved what we wanted to. We got some good press. I know that's not how anybody thinks out there, but just, taking the long view, I think is really important. There's another thing that occurred to me as Christina was talking about, we were talking about where CSR programs are going and how they've evolved. It occurs to me that I think we're coming full circle back to community-based philanthropy and community-based volunteering. And, it used to be that way. Back in the day when I started my career, we had, everybody had local businesses that were headquartered in their town. Richmond's a good example. We had a lot of businesses who were headquartered here, who all of their effort was here. In the 80s, 90s, and aughts, globalization took over, and all the banks now are headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. And, as you know, a lot of this has diffused. I remember years ago when I worked at Children's Hospital, and Mobile Foundation was headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia, and they were a big supporter of ours. And I was talking to the head of the foundation, and he said, we're 60% of our business is overseas now, and we're thinking we need to shift more of our focus in that direction. It's like, I don't know. We still, we need you here. What are you talking about? But now I think companies are realizing we need more on the ground recognition. We need more on the ground connection to the communities we serve, and the communities we do business in, and the communities we employ people from. And I think that's another big thing, is employees are driving a lot of this. We've seen, it was millennials and then Gen Xers, and now it's the Generation Zoom, but they're all, the employees want to work for a company that they feel is connected to their community, is doing good work in the community, that they can feel good about who they're working with. So I think all of that is very much tied up in what we're talking about, a very important part of what we're talking about.
And Jeff, that's such a good point about the youngest generation that, will be entering the workforce, and they are asking those hard questions of the employers. Mm-hmm. They want to know how the employer is giving back, and they want to know the impact that employer is having on some really, really impactful issues. And I think it's great. I love it. But companies have to be prepared to answer those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Really great. Just observation there, and something that I think is so critical for businesses that are planning for success in 2021 and the decade to come, and heck, the century to come. I think, I feel that there is a bit of a change in the zeitgeist in terms of what work is, what it means, and how employees interface with that. And I think that these elements of corporate social responsibility are a huge part of how a company both attracts clients, but also retains the employees that they have. It's brand management, and it's also, the best part about this is it's the right thing to do. That shouldn't get lost in this whole conversation.
Good point.
I know that we're getting close to the noon hour, and so I always love ending these conversations on sort of a positive takeaway. I know that 5 years from now, we will all have the opportunity to say, what did I do during the pandemic? And was it just Tiger King on repeat, or? But no, in all seriousness, I think that we've all had the opportunity to, recognize the negative, and that's on the front page every day, and we've lived through it, and whether that's just the isolation for folks that are fortunate enough to work from home and have their 9th grader in algebra across the hall. Good work, Jack. But I think that when we look back, I think that we will recognize there have been some positive things that have happened in this time. We've had to examine, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but just sort of when you think about any new habits that you formed, or anything that you bring to your professional career or the organization that you're with, What's sort of a good takeaway for folks as they examine this tough time? And whoever feels like chewing on that question first, I'll give the floor to you. So,
all right, I'll jump in. I see Christina
Yeah.
thinking about it, so I'll give you a minute more to think about that.
Yeah.
I do think, I do think one of the positive things that has come out of COVID, and it's not just my own observation. I've been reading about this, and I've been seeing it in some of the response from some of our donors and others, is it's caused people to be more reflective about what really matters. I mean, as you spend time holed up at home with your family, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot who these people are. I kind of like them, I mean, that goes both ways. I know, it's not always positive, but focusing on the things that matter has been real important. And even, it's interesting because people in fundraising were saying, gosh, I wanted to talk to folks about planned giving, but it seems like this is a bad time to be talking to people about estate planning because, it seems like you're taking advantage of the situation, or you're bringing up, death at a time when we've got a fatal, epidemic raging through the country. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And people were thinking, about life issues, and they were thinking about life planning, and they are thinking about, gosh, if something were to happen, what have I done with my life, and have I done anything important that matters? And so thinking about their legacy giving and planned giving was very much on people's minds, and being more thoughtful about ways they could help their community as they saw that their neighbors were in need has been very much on people's minds. So I think it's been good for us. And I think, I mentioned the presidential elections, not because I want to ingest politics into this, but I was a poli-sci major in college, and I did go to Washington with a congressional internship. And so I can't help myself. I'm a sucker for the news. I'm a news junkie, but like everybody else, it got too much. I just couldn't take it. I was like, enough already. I got to stop reading all this stuff. And I realized this is a time for us to all say, okay, there's only so much we can do about the dysfunction in Washington, but we can take care of our own community. We need to invest our time and our effort and energy in making change where we can make change. I feel very strongly that that's happening, and that people are starting to say, there's stuff we can do, and there's stuff we need to do, and we need to take control of our own destiny, our own community, and make change for good. And so I'm seeing that and feeling that, and I think I'm hoping that will last.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That recognition of agency and a slower pace of reflection is certainly something that the silver lining in all of this. Christina, what are your thoughts as you hear Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, he was spot on. Just personally, it has been a real joy to be able to spend more unstructured time with my family, because I have 2 teenagers. And so it's just been like boom, 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 and things slowed down because we weren't going anywhere. So there was something really wonderful about that. But to your point, Jeff, yes, at times it was just like, oh my gosh, get me out of here. But then, professionally, I think that when everything sort of shut down, it gave us an opportunity to be reflective and say, where is it that what can we bring forward? What can we put forward? What can we implement that we haven't had time to do? And to really force us, like the virtual volunteering and the Skills Connect and all of these initiatives that we were talking about doing, but the pandemic forced us to say, we need to do this now. This is an emergent need right now. Let's do it. And I'm just really proud of the team that we were able to just pivot and make it happen. So yeah.
No, I love it. That's fantastic. I can't tell you both how much I've enjoyed this conversation. This has just been great to benefit from your perspective and insight. Tell our audience, how can they connect with the Community Foundation, Christina? What's the best way that people can either give back or just connect with you all?
I would say go to the Community Foundation webpage. That is your first step. You can also go to Hands On Greater Richmond. So it's just handsonrva.org, or you can go to cfrichmond.org.
Perfect. And Jeff, folks, have their bunker supply of green beans and toilet paper. Maybe they're thinking that was an overreaction and somebody in the community could use this rather than me. How can they connect with Feed More?
Well, hang on to the toilet paper because it looks like we're going to get a shortage on that again. But the green beans, we'll take those. Actually, feedmore.org. Just come to our website. Ways to volunteer, ways to donate. If you want to talk to us about corporate volunteering, just give a call and ask for me. I'd be happy to talk to you about ways that we can get your CSR program plugged in, skills-based volunteering, whatever it is you're looking to do. Happy to just have a conversation with you about it.
Love it. Well, thank you both again. This has been a great conversation, and I know that our audience will really benefit as they think about their spot in this time and place and ways that they can, both better the running of their organization, but also give back in an effective and meaningful way. So, Jeff, Christina, I really enjoyed this, and I thank you both very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Kevin.
you, Kevin. Nice to meet you, Jeff.
You as well, Christina. Keep up your good work.
You too.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Folks out there in webinar land, we always appreciate you joining us. This has been The Beacon for Wednesday, December 2nd. I will just plug real quick that any of our clients out there that are looking to navigate the last month of the year, I know that there's a lot that goes into final payroll runs, bonus runs, tax situation, benefits. There's a lot that needs to happen before December 31st. And there are a lot of important dates. So please go to dominionpayroll.com/help-guides. And you'll find all the resources that you need from our year-end seminar and the guide there to help you navigate this year-end. With that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. My name is Kevin Wilson. This has been The Beacon. We appreciate you being here. And I hope everybody has a great remainder of their week. Take care, everybody.